All right, so welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
You send in this book by Robert Maurer, One Small Step Can Change Your Life, the Kaizen Way. And, well, that's exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Dive deep into this one
Uh-huh.
and extract all those juicy insights, just for you.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to explore, those core ideas of Kaizen and how these principles, it can help you achieve your goals without feeling overwhelmed by the usual pressure of needing to make massive, daunting changes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something we all struggle with.
Oh, totally.
That feeling of being overwhelmed when you think about change.
Absolutely. And, to help us break it all down, we have a resident analyst here.
Always happy to be here.
Now, what really struck me right off the bat with Maurer's work is that powerful central theme that lasting results really come from those small incremental changes.
Right.
It really challenges that common notion we have that change has to be this big, dramatic, sometimes even painful event.
Right.
So let's unpack this a little bit.
Okay.
And starting with the first myth that the book tackles,
Mm.
change is hard.
Well, you know what's fascinating is right off the bat, the book uses this really relatable example to kind of challenge this, this myth.
Right.
And it talks about, the genuine health risks that we have now of just spending too much time sitting down.
Yeah.
And an increased chance of heart attack and early death.
Yeah.
And the kicker is that, hitting the gym for an hour might not undo the damage if you're sedentary for, the rest of the time.
Yeah, exactly. The Mayo Clinic study that they mentioned really highlights this.
Yeah.
You'd think that, having that dedicated workout time would be enough of a buffer, right?
You would think that, yeah.
But the book really points out
Yeah.
that it's those long periods of inactivity that seem to be the real culprit here, affecting things like the KK1 enzyme, which is involved in processing fat, metabolic rate, good cholesterol production.
It all slows down.
It does. Yeah, it really does.
When we just sit there.
It does. And this is where the Kaizen approach comes in.
Yes.
And offers this, surprisingly simple solution, and emphasizing that it's the small and manageable
Right.
that's effective. So just standing up the book notes actually doubles your metabolic rate.
Yeah.
And then taking even a short walk more than doubles it again.
Exactly.
So you can see the contrast here, right?
Yeah.
It's that kind of huge and unmanageable feeling of like, okay, I got to go work out for an hour every day.
Right. Or an hour, 3 days a week or whatever it might be.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Versus small and doable.
Yeah, just incorporate a little more movement.
Exactly, right into your, regular routine.
Right.
It really makes you think about our cultural mindset, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
We're so bombarded with this bigger is better.
Right.
Movie screens, meal portions, extreme makeovers.
Supersize me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
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 It almost feels counterintuitive to think that something as, basic as just standing up more could actually have a real impact.
Right.
But that seems to be a core takeaway here in busting this first myth.
I think so.
So that really leads us perfectly into this second myth.
Okay.
The size of the step determines the size of the result. So take big steps for big results.
Right.
The book really challenges this head on by contrasting betting small, which is the Kaizen way, with betting big, which often gets framed as, innovation, both in the business world and our personal lives.
Exactly. Yeah.
So think about how often we do that in our own lives, right? We jump straight to those bet big strategies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Those crash diets, those super intense workout plans, the ones that promise like rapid, dramatic results.
Right.
But the problem is, and as the book points out, they often kind of crumble because they demand such a high level of willpower that it's just not sustainable.
It's too difficult to maintain.
It is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Trying to sustain that level of, effort and restriction is just incredibly difficult for most of us.
It is, yeah.
The book even touches on the American Heart Association's previous recommendation of 30 minutes of exercise 5 days a week.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
That was a while ago.
It was, yeah, and it's, great, well-intentioned.
Yeah.
But for many of us who have, busy schedules,
Right.
trying to consistently fit that in can feel like another huge hurdle to overcome.
Absolutely. Another big step, another big change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the book brings in more of this, fascinating research from the Mayo Clinic.
Oh, okay.
This time looking at lean individuals who
Interesting.
weren't necessarily, gym fanatics.
Yeah.
But they simply moved more throughout the day.
Okay.
So, just everyday activities, pacing, choosing to park a little further away, standing instead of sitting.
Yeah, got it.
And that seemingly, small increase in daily movement actually led to about a 300-calorie difference per day.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
Which if you do that every single day for a year, that translates to a potential 30-pound difference.
That's incredible.
It really is. It really underscores how those small, consistent movements can accumulate into something really significant.
Yeah.
So for you, it's less about feeling like you need to carve out these huge chunks of time for exercise and more about those consistent small opportunities to just move a little bit more.
Yeah, build it into your day.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So it beautifully illustrates how, the gradual, almost imperceptible steps of Kaizen can lead to, substantial long-term results, especially when you compare it to the often unsustainable impact of those, big drastic changes.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
Let's tackle myth number 3.
Okay, Timmy.
Kaizen is slow innovation is quicker. This one really caught my eye.
Yeah.
Especially with the example the book uses, Toyota.
Oh, yeah. What about them?
So as the book mentions, Toyota actually considers Kaizen their very essence.
I can see that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
For decades.
Yeah.
Their name was synonymous with exceptional quality and reliability. And that was largely due to their unwavering commitment to this incremental continuous improvement.
Right.
But then, as the book explains, around 2002, they kind of shifted their primary focus to becoming the world's largest automaker.
Okay.
So they started prioritizing rapid expansion, and they significantly boosted their production capacity.
Okay.
And this shift, this move away from their foundational Kaizen principles, actually had some pretty negative repercussions.
Oh.
The book details how their suppliers started to struggle to maintain that same level of quality.
Right.
And these new factories that they were building at such a rapid pace often lacked that, deeply ingrained Kaizen culture.
Right.
So the result, more than 9 million vehicle recalls and a pretty significant dent in their long-standing reputation for quality.
Wow, so it really backfired.
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
The internal memo from Teruo Suzuki, which is quoted in the book, really captures this concern that they had about, losing that Kaizen discipline as they scaled up so aggressively.
So what did they do?
Well, it's really insightful to see how they recognized this misstep.
Okay.
And they actively made an effort to return to those core Kaizen principles.
Interesting.
So the book describes how they deliberately slowed down production.
Okay.
They gave more autonomy to their local managers. They invested heavily in training to reinforce that Kaizen culture.
Okay.
And again, they started prioritizing quality over just sheer volume.
Right.
With this, really strong emphasis on identifying and fixing those small defects early in the process.
Right.
So for you, even at the highest level, sometimes a return to those foundational principles can be essential for long-term success.
I agree.
And the outcome, as the book emphasizes, was they restored their hard-earned reputation.
That's great.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
So it really underscores how Kaizen isn't about slow results. It's about building those sustainable habits and avoiding those potentially, painful consequences that can arise from taking steps that are just too big, too fast without that solid foundation.
Absolutely, yeah.
So now that we've addressed those common misconceptions we might have about change, the book really dives into the core of Kaizen, right? The remarkable power of these, small, seemingly insignificant steps in creating lasting change.
Okay.
The author draws on his extensive experience, over 30 years of observing clients to illustrate just how effective this method can be across such a wide range of situations.
So give me an example of what kind of things. Well, what's really compelling is just the sheer variety of areas where his clients achieved, significant and lasting transformations through these small incremental changes.
Okay.
The book lists everything from tackling weight loss and establishing consistent exercise routines to overcoming addictions, improving the quality of relationships, getting more organized, and even making, meaningful progress in their careers.
Wow. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all.
It really isn't, no.
Right.
It paints a picture of Kaizen as this, incredibly versatile and adaptable approach.
Right.
The book even refers to it as an open secret.
Interesting.
Something that's been quietly and effectively used in Japanese businesses for years and by individuals around the world.
Yeah.
It's a natural and surprisingly graceful technique
Right.
that can be integrated into even the most, demanding schedules without causing this major disruption.
Right. And this sets the stage for, a deeper exploration of why the more commonly embraced innovation approach to change, with its emphasis on those big, rapid shifts, often falls short when compared to the steady, consistent progress that Kaizen offers.
Right.
And the book uses the story of Julie to highlight this contrast in action.
Right.
So Julie's situation is incredibly challenging.
What's going on with Julie?
Well, she's dealing with high blood pressure.
Oh, wow.
Constant fatigue. She's a divorced mother.
Okay.
Carrying so much responsibility on her shoulders.
Right.
Feeling completely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Just barely holding on to her job. Struggling with her weight.
Oh, yeah.
And under a mountain of stress.
Yeah, you can really feel the weight of her circumstances.
You can, really feel for her.
Yeah.
And that kind of immediate innovation solution that often springs to mind in these situations is exercise.
Okay.
That big sweeping recommendation to suddenly start working out regularly.
Right.
But the book astutely points out why this kind of advice, while well-intentioned, often fails to actually take root.
Right.
So, it requires a significant time commitment, a considerable amount of initial effort, and importantly, it can trigger a real fear of disrupting those already precarious routines that someone like Julie has established just to get through the day.
Yeah, I can see this.
For you, if you've ever felt that initial resistance to making a big change, Julie's situation probably really resonates.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I can see myself there.
Yeah.
Sure.
You can just imagine Julie's internal reaction, right? To being told to add regular exercise to her already overflowing plate.
Right.
She's probably feeling misunderstood.
Yeah.
Perhaps even guilty for not already doing it.
Right.
And then the well-meaning doctor, on the other hand, might be feeling frustrated by that lack of follow-through.
Yeah.
It's a cycle that's so easy to fall into.
It is. It is.
So the book defines, innovation in that context that's often taught in business schools as this process of, large-scale, often disruptive change, ideally occurring very rapidly and leading to, dramatic, noticeable turnaround.
Right.
And we see examples of this all the time, right?
I do, yeah.
Both in the corporate world, think of those massive layoffs that companies do to cut costs.
Right.
Or huge investments in new technology.
Yeah, hoping for a quick competitive edge.
Exactly.
Right.
And then in our own personal lives, we decide to completely eliminate our favorite foods overnight.
Right.
We try to quit a bad habit cold turkey or, make a sudden risky social leap.
Yeah.
While innovation can sometimes be successful.
It can.
Right. It can provide that initial surge of motivation and even a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
The book really raises a critical question about its long-term viability.
Okay.
So that initial, short-term success is often followed by a gradual slide back into old, more comfortable habits.
It is. Yeah.
It is. And the analogy the book uses is really good.
Okay.
It's like trying to charge straight up a really steep hill.
Okay.
And then you just lose momentum.
You run out of steam.
You do before you reach the top.
I've been there.
Yeah, we've all been there, haven't we?
Yeah.
And it perfectly captures that difficulty of sustaining that intense level of effort that these, big innovative changes often demand.
Right.
So this really leads us to consider the hysterical origin of Kaizen.
Okay.
And they're actually quite fascinating.
Okay.
So the book dives into the U.S. government's training within industries, or TWI courses.
Oh, wow.
That were developed during World War II.
Okay.
So given the immense, time pressures and the shortages of skilled personnel, they just couldn't afford to undertake those massive time-consuming overhauls of their production processes.
Yeah, I could see that.
So instead, TWI emphasized this concept of continuous improvement.
Okay.
And they focused on identifying and implementing hundreds of small, incremental improvements to their existing jobs.
Okay.
Using the equipment and resources that they already had.
So not these radical leaps.
Not those big leaps, no.
Interesting.
It was about those consistent, smaller adjustments and refinements.
Got it.
And a really key figure in championing this approach was Dr. W. Edwards Deming.
Oh, yeah.
Who strongly advocated for the importance of involving every single employee in this process of ongoing improvement.
Right.
So that wartime context actually helped to kind of break down that traditional, top-down management style and encouraged everyone from the, assembly line worker up to management to actively look for those small ways to boost both quality and efficiency in their, day-to-day tasks.
I like that.
Yeah. And the book mentions, the introduction of those suggestion boxes on factory floors.
Oh, right.
Where even the assembly line workers could contribute their ideas for improvement. And it was expected that, executives would actually review and really treat those comments with respect.
I see.
And, it might have seemed like an insufficient approach at the time.
Right.
But as the book highlights, that cumulative effect of those many small steps actually led to this, remarkable acceleration in America's manufacturing capacity.
Wow.
And really played a significant role in the Allied victory.
That's amazing.
It is. Yeah, it is. So for you, it's a reminder that even seemingly small contributions and changes when done consistently can really add up to significant overall progress.
Yeah, those ripple effects.
Right.
I mean, huge.
Yeah, and the quote from that era that the book includes really sums this up nicely.
What is it?
Don't look for the big, quick improvement.
Okay.
Seek the small improvement one day at a time. That's the only way it happens. And when it happens, it lasts.
That's powerful.
It is, yeah. It really speaks to that enduring impact of those small, consistent efforts over time.
Right.
So now the book delves into that fascinating science behind why those small steps are often so much more effective for creating lasting change. And it focuses specifically on the brain's natural tendency to resist significant change and how Kaizen really cleverly works to bypass that resistance.
Okay.
So it introduces this triune brain concept.
Interesting.
You have that more primitive reptilian brain, the emotional mammalian midbrain, and then that more recently evolved rational cortex. And it's the cortex, that newest part of our brain, where our higher level, rational thought, our creativity, and our ability to plan for and implement change resides. And those are the very things that we need when we're trying to make a positive shift in our lives.
Right.
But the midbrain houses the amygdala, which is this, crucial part of our brain responsible for our fight or flight response.
Survival mechanism.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's where the inherent challenge with big change really comes in.
Okay.
So the amygdala is constantly scanning for those potential threats, right? And it perceives any significant departure from our established routines as potential danger, triggering those alarm bells.
Yeah.
And when that alarm goes off, as the book explains, it actually restricts our access to the cortex, that rational thinking part of our brain that we need to make those conscious, positive choices.
Interesting.
So for you, that feeling of like your mind going blank or feeling just completely overwhelmed when you're thinking about making a big change, that's your amygdala doing its job.
That's fascinating.
It is, yeah. But the beauty of Kaizen is it offers this completely different pathway.
Okay.
By setting goals that are so small and easily achievable that they just don't register as a threat to the amygdala.
Right.
We essentially kind of tiptoe past that ancient alarm system.
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
Keeping it asleep, preventing it from triggering that paralyzing fear response.
Right.
And as we consistently take these, tiny manageable steps, we gradually engage the cortex, which then starts to create those new neural pathways.
Interesting.
The software for change, as the book calls it.
I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
And we slowly but surely start building those new habits. And over time, actually weakening our brain's resistance to change.
Interesting.
And Julie's eventual enjoyment of exercise, after starting with that 1 minute of daily marching, is a perfect example of this process in action. So in essence, the book summarizes how these seemingly insignificant small steps effectively work to rewire our nervous system.
Right.
They unstick those creative blocks that fear can create. They consistently, bypass that ingrained fight or flight response and to gradually forge those, new and stronger neuron connections. eventually leading to the brain actually embracing the change process.
Wow.
And even accelerating progress as it becomes more comfortable with those new patterns.
That's amazing.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the book makes a really interesting point about how we so often use the word stress to describe the challenges of modern life.
Yeah, we do.
When historically, many of those feelings might have been more directly understood as fear.
Right.
The book shares insightful quotes from, highly successful individuals, like Jack Welch, and astronaut Sally Ride, who openly used the word fear when discussing, the significant responsibilities and challenges that they faced in their careers.
Interesting.
So it's a powerful and perhaps even liberating shift in perspective.
It is, yeah.
The book points out how adults so often gravitate towards terms like stress and anxiety to describe their difficulties, while children, on the other hand, are often much more direct.
Yeah.
Simply saying they're scared or afraid.
Right.
So the book suggests that this difference might actually stem from, this kind of societal expectation that adults should always feel in control. So when that underlying feeling of, fear arises, we might be more inclined to label it as something else.
Yeah.
Perhaps even a disorder to be treated, rather than just acknowledging that very, natural human response of fear in the face of the unknown.
Fear of the unknown is very real.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
And as the book argues, avoiding that underlying fear can actually link to unproductive behaviors. Like clinging to those familiar, but ultimately ineffective solutions.
Yeah.
It's like that classic streetlight fallacy example.
Oh, yeah. Explain that one.
Right. So it's the, well-known story of the person who lost their keys down this dark alley, but they're searching for them under the streetlight because the light is better there.
Right.
Even though they know that's not where they dropped them.
Yeah. It's about avoiding discomfort.
It is.
Of really confronting the issue.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
So the book emphasizes that fear is actually a perfectly natural response to having ambitions and caring deeply about something. And simply acknowledging that fear can really help us feel less alone and less distressed during those difficult times.
I can see that, yeah.
So for you, recognizing the role of that fear in your own resistance to change can be a really valuable insight.
I think so, for sure.
And importantly, understanding that, underlying fear allows us to then deliberately choose those small Kaizen steps that gently bypass it. Right. And we gradually build those new healthier habits without triggering that overwhelming sense of threat.
Right.
Okay. So another really central technique in the Kaizen approach, and one that the book dedicates significant attention to, is the remarkable power of asking small questions.
Interesting.
It highlights how this seemingly simple practice can actually program our brains for both increased creativity and positive change. And this applies not only to ourselves, but also to how we interact with and influence others.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And the anecdote that the book shares about Patrick, the manufacturing supervisor, really vividly illustrates this.
Okay, so what happened with Patrick?
So his initial attempts to drive, radical improvement within his company involved asking these really large, demanding questions aimed at, inspiring immediate and significant change. But instead of sparking innovation, these grand pronouncements largely led to, employee discomfort, this feeling of being put on the spot. And ultimately a kind of a freeze up of new ideas.
So it backfired.
It did. Yeah.
Okay.
But the dynamic completely shifted when Patrick adjusted his approach and started asking those much smaller, more gentle questions. Things like, can you think of one very small step you might be able to take to improve our current process, or even just one tiny aspect of our product? And the response, as the book describes, was dramatically different. So employees became significantly more engaged. And the quality and quantity of practical, actionable suggestions actually increased substantially.
Wow.
And it led to some, real tangible improvements.
That's great.
It was, it really brings to life that quote from Sam Keen that the book includes. What shapes our lives are.